The rain had been falling since morning, turning the ancient cobblestones of Westminster Abbey dark and slick. Inside the grand cathedral, hundreds of people sat in silence, their faces marked with concern and sadness. The air felt heavy, thick with unspoken worry. Everyone knew why they were gathered here today, though nobody wanted to believe it was happening. William stood near the front of the abbey, his tall frame rigid and his jaw tight. He wore a dark suit, perfectly tailored but somehow looking too formal, too heavy on his shoulders. His hands were clasped in front of him, knuckles white from the pressure. His eyes, usually so bright and warm, seemed distant now, looking at something far beyond the stone walls surrounding them. Kate sat in the front row, her presence like a quiet anchor in the storm of emotion swirling through the room. She wore a simple navy dress, elegant but understated. Her hair was pulled back neatly, revealing a face that carried both strength and vulnerability. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers intertwined, and though she sat still, there was something about her posture that showed she was ready to move at any moment, ready to do whatever was needed. The cathedral had seen centuries of history. Kings and queens had been crowned here. Royal weddings had filled these halls with joy and celebration. But today was different. Today, the weight of uncertainty pressed down on everyone present. The future felt unclear, fragile, like glass that might shatter at any moment. Outside, crowds had gathered despite the rain. People stood shoulder to shoulder, umbrellas forming a sea of black and gray. They waited in silence, occasionally whispering to one another, sharing what little news they had heard. Some held flowers, others clutched photographs. Many simply stood with their hands in their pockets, heads bowed, united in their concern for the family they had grown to love over the years. Inside the abbey, the king sat in his designated place, his face drawn and pale. He had always carried himself with such dignity, such unwavering composure, but today, even he seemed smaller somehow, as though the weight of the crown and the burden of his worries had finally become too much to bear alone. His eyes moved across the gathered people, taking in the faces of family members, advisors, and friends who had come to offer their support. The service had not yet begun, but the atmosphere was already charged with emotion. People shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with the silence, yet unwilling to break it. Someone coughed softly. Another person reached for a handkerchief, dabbing at their eyes before tears could fall. These small gestures spoke volumes about the collective heartache filling the space. William had been standing for what felt like hours, though it had only been minutes. His mind wandered back through the years, through memories that now felt both precious and painful. He remembered running through palace gardens as a child, his mother laughing as she chased after him. He remembered the day he first met Kate, how her smile had made everything else fade away. He remembered his wedding day, standing at this very altar, promising to love and protect her through everything life might bring. Now, standing here again, he felt the full weight of those promises. Life had brought them to this moment, one they had hoped would never come. The doctors had been clear, but William had refused to fully accept it. He had wanted to believe that somehow things would get better, that there would be more time. But time, he was learning, was not something anyone could control or negotiate with. Kate had been his strength through it all. While he struggled to maintain his composure in public, breaking down only in private moments, she had remained steady. She had held their family together, making sure their children felt safe and loved even as their world threatened to fall apart. She had attended meetings, fulfilled obligations, and somehow still found the energy to sit with him late at night when the fear became too overwhelming to bear alone. The organ began to play softly, a gentle melody that seemed to wrap around everyone like a comforting embrace. The sound filled the high ceilings, echoing off the ancient stones. People straightened in their seats, preparing themselves for what was to come. The clergy members began to move into position, their white robes flowing as they walked with measured, respectful steps. William took a deep breath, trying to center himself. He could feel eyes on him, people watching to see how he would handle this moment. The pressure was immense. He was not just a husband, a father, a son. He was a symbol, a figure that millions looked to for strength and stability. But right now he felt like neither. He felt like a man standing on the edge of an abyss, knowing he was about to step forward into darkness. A small movement caught his attention. Kate had shifted slightly, and though she was not looking directly at him, he knew she was aware of him. attuned to his emotional state in that way couples develop after years together. She had always been able to sense when he needed her, even before he realized it himself. Her mere presence was grounding, reminding him that he was not alone in this, that whatever came next, they would face it together. The king glanced toward William, his expression unreadable but his eyes full of understanding. He had been through his own trials, his own moments of unbearable grief and impossible choices. He knew what his son was feeling right now because he had stood in similar shoes, had carried similar burdens. There was no handbook for this kind of pain, no protocol that could guide them through the raw human emotion of it all. The choir began to sing, their voices pure and clear, rising toward the vaulted ceiling. The sound was beautiful, almost heartbreaking in its perfection. Some people in the congregation began to quietly weep, no longer able to hold back their emotions. Tissues appeared. Eyes were wiped, but still everyone tried to maintain the dignity the moment demanded. William closed his eyes for just a second, allowing himself to feel everything he had been trying to suppress. The fear, the love, the gratitude for what had been, and the grief for what might be lost. He let it wash over him like a wave, and then, with tremendous effort, he pulled himself back together. When he opened his eyes again, they were clearer, more focused. He knew what he needed to do. The ceremony was about to begin, and with it a moment that would be remembered for generations. Nobody in that cathedral knew exactly what would happen in the next few moments, but everyone could feel that something significant was building, something that would touch hearts and remind them all of what truly mattered in life. In that ancient sacred space, surrounded by history and hope, they waited together for what would come next. The music continued to fill Westminster Abbey, each note seeming to carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken prayers. Kate remained seated in the front row, her posture perfect despite the turmoil she felt inside. She had learned long ago how to wear a mask of composure, how to smile when cameras flashed even when her heart was breaking. But today was different. Today, the mask felt heavier than ever before. She thought back to the phone call that had changed everything. It had come on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon while she was helping their youngest with homework. The sound of William's voice on the other end, shaking and uncertain, had immediately told her something was terribly wrong. He never sounded like that. William was always the steady one, the person who faced challenges with quiet determination. But that day she had heard fear in his voice, raw and undeniable. The weeks that followed had been a blur of hospital visits, specialist consultations, and sleepless nights. Kate had accompanied William to every appointment, sitting beside him as doctors delivered news that grew progressively more difficult to hear. She had watched her husband's face change with each update, seeing the hope drain from his eyes bit by bit. And through it all, she had held his hand, squeezed it tight, and silently promised that they would get through this together, no matter what happened. Their children had sensed something was wrong, of course. Children always do, no matter how much parents try to shield them. Kate had spent countless hours answering their questions as honestly as she could, while still protecting their innocence. She had held them when they cried, reassured them when they were scared, and maintained as much normalcy as possible in their daily routines. School runs, bedtime stories, family dinners, these small rituals had become lifelines, anchors in a sea of uncertainty. Now, sitting in the Abbey, Kate allowed herself a moment to simply breathe. She focused on the rhythm of air moving in and out of her lungs, a meditation technique she had learned years ago but rarely needed to use. In, out, in, out. With each breath, she gathered her strength, pulling it from somewhere deep within herself that she had not known existed until recently. She could feel the eyes of the congregation on her, could sense their sympathy and support. Some of these people were close friends. Others were distant relatives or officials she had met only at formal events. But in this moment, they were all united by their concern and their shared humanity. Pain and fear did not discriminate between commoners and royals. Everyone in this room understood loss on some level, had faced their own moments of unbearable difficulty. Kate's thoughts drifted to her own family, to her parents and siblings who had rallied around her during these challenging weeks. Her mother had been particularly supportive, arriving at their home with casseroles and kind words, never pushing but always available when Kate needed to talk. Her father had taken the children on outings, giving them moments of normalcy and joy even as the adults struggled with heavier concerns. Her siblings had called regularly, offering whatever help they could provide. The support had been overwhelming and deeply appreciated, but Kate also knew that ultimately, she and William would have to face this together, in their own way. No amount of support from others could change the fundamental reality of what they were dealing with. This was their burden to carry, their challenge to overcome or learn to live with, and Kate was determined to be strong enough for both of them if necessary. She glanced sideways without moving her head, using only her eyes to look toward where William stood. He appeared so alone up there despite being surrounded by people. His shoulders were tense, his stance rigid. She knew that posture well. It was how he looked when he was fighting to maintain control, when everything inside him wanted to crumble but duty demanded he remain upright. Her heart ached for him, but she also felt proud. Proud of his strength, his commitment, his unwavering sense of responsibility. The clergy members began to speak, their voices solemn and measured. Kate forced herself to focus on their words, to be present in this moment rather than lost in her own thoughts and worries. They spoke of faith and hope, of strength in adversity and the power of love to sustain us through our darkest hours. The words were beautiful and comforting, but Kate found herself wondering if they were enough. Could faith alone carry them through what lay ahead? Could hope sustain them when reality felt so harsh? She thought about her wedding day, standing beside William in this very place, promising to love him in sickness and health for better or worse. At the time, those words had seemed almost ceremonial, a traditional part of the vows that everyone said but few truly considered. She had been young and in love, unable to imagine that worse could ever really come, but now she understood. Now those words had taken on a weight and meaning she had never anticipated. Kate had always believed she was strong. Growing up, she had faced her share of challenges and overcome them with grace. She had endured intense public scrutiny, invasive media attention, and the constant pressure of royal life. She had given birth to 3 children, each time knowing that the world was watching and waiting. She had mastered the art of the perfect public appearance, learned to give speeches without showing nerves, and could navigate complex social situations with ease. But this was different. This was testing her in ways she had never been tested before. Sometimes, late at night when everyone else was asleep, Kate would allow herself to cry. She would go into the bathroom, turn on the shower to mask the sound and let the tears come. She would sob for the unfairness of it all, for the fear that gripped her heart, for the future that suddenly felt uncertain, and then after allowing herself those precious minutes of release, she would wash her face, dry her eyes, and return to bed. By morning, she would be composed again, ready to face another day with strength and grace. The king shifted in his seat, drawing Kate's attention. She looked at him properly for the first time since arriving at the abbey. He appeared older than she remembered, more fragile. The crown he had worked so hard to prepare for, the role he had waited decades to fulfill, now seemed to sit heavily on his head. His eyes held a sadness that went beyond this single moment. He accumulated weariness from years of duty and sacrifice. Kate felt a wave of compassion for him. He had lost so much already in his life. He had faced public criticism and personal heartbreak. He had made mistakes and lived with their consequences. And now, watching his son struggle, seeing his family face yet another trial, must have been almost unbearable. She caught his eye for just a moment, and something passed between them, an understanding. A shared recognition of the impossible position they were all in, trapped between their public roles and their private pain. The choir began another hymn, and people throughout the abbey rose to their feet. Kate stood as well, grateful for the change in position after sitting still for so long. She held the hymnal in her hands but found she did not need it. She knew these words by heart, had sung them countless times at various services and events over the years. But today they carried new meaning. Today each line felt personal, as though written specifically for this moment, for her heart, for her fears. As she sang, Kate felt something shift inside her. A resolve, quiet but powerful, settled into her bones. Whatever happened next, whatever challenges they would face in the coming days, weeks, or months, she would not break. She would bend, yes. She would cry in private moments. She would struggle and doubt and fear, but she would not break. For William, for their children, for the life they had built together, she would find the strength to keep going. She would be the rock he needed, just as he had been for her so many times before. The hymn ended, and people sat down again. Kate lowered herself back into her seat, feeling different than she had just moments before. Stronger, more certain. She did not know what the next few minutes would bring, but she knew she was ready to face it. She was ready to stand beside her husband, to support him in whatever way he needed, to show the world that love could endure even the most difficult of circumstances. William felt as though time had slowed down to an almost unbearable crawl. Each second stretched out endlessly, filled with the weight of everything that had led to this moment. His mind kept returning to conversations with doctors, to test results delivered with sympathetic expressions, to the night he had sat in their bedroom and tried to explain to Kate that their lives were about to change in ways they could never have imagined. He remembered her reaction so clearly. She had not cried at first. Instead, she had simply taken his hands in hers and looked into his eyes with such fierce determination that he had almost believed everything would be all right. Almost. But then, later that night, he had woken to find her side of the bed empty. He had found her in their children's rooms, standing silently in each doorway watching them sleep with tears streaming down her face. That image haunted him now. Kate, always so strong and composed, reduced to silent tears as she watched their children dream, innocent and unaware of the storm that was gathering around their family. It was in that moment William had truly understood the magnitude of what they were facing. This was not just about him, not just about medical diagnoses and treatment plans. This was about their entire family, about the life they had built together, about the future they had always assumed would be theirs. The clergy continued their service, but William found it difficult to focus on their words. His thoughts kept scattering, jumping from one memory to another like a stone skipping across water. He thought about his mother, about the lessons she had tried to teach him before she was taken too soon. She had understood the weight of public duty, the pressure of living every moment under scrutiny. But she had also understood the importance of authenticity, of allowing yourself to be human even when the world expected you to be superhuman. What would she think of him now? Would she be proud of how he had tried to handle everything? Or would she gently remind him that it was okay to show vulnerability, okay to admit when things were too heavy to bear alone? He wished he could talk to her, could hear her voice offering guidance and comfort. But that was impossible, and so he was left to navigate this on his own, trying to balance what was expected of him with what he genuinely felt. A slight commotion near the entrance of the abbey briefly drew his attention. More people were filing in, late arrivals finding their seats as quietly as possible. He recognized some faces, family members who had traveled from distant places to be here today. Their presence was touching, a reminder that even in the darkest moments people came together. Communities formed around shared concern and love. It was one of the beautiful aspects of humanity that often went unnoticed until times of crisis. William's hands, still clasped in front of him, had begun to ache from the tension. He consciously relaxed them, flexing his fingers to restore circulation. Such a small physical act, yet it required surprising effort. Every part of his body seemed to be holding stress, muscles tight and coiled like springs ready to release. He rolled his shoulders slightly, trying to ease some of the pressure, but it provided only momentary relief. The king was speaking now, his voice carrying across the abbey with practiced authority. But William could hear the strain beneath the formal tones, could detect the emotion his father was working so hard to suppress. They had talked extensively over the past weeks, late-night conversations that ranged from practical matters to deeper philosophical discussions about duty, family, and what truly mattered in life. His father had shared stories from his own life, moments of difficulty and doubt that he had rarely spoken about before. Those conversations had brought them closer than they had been in years. Crisis had a way of stripping away pretense, of cutting through the formal distance that their positions often required them to maintain. For the first time in a long while, William had seen his father not as the king, but simply as a man who had faced his own struggles and survived them. It was both comforting and sobering. The congregation shifted, and William sensed a change in the atmosphere. Something was about to happen. He could feel it in the air, could see it in the way people were straightening in their seats, preparing themselves. His heart rate increased, pounding against his ribs with uncomfortable force. This was it. This was the moment he had been both dreading and anticipating. He thought of his children again, safely at home with trusted caregivers. They had wanted to come, had argued that they were old enough to be present for important family moments. But William and Kate had gently insisted they stay home. Some burdens were too heavy for young shoulders to carry. Some images once seen could never be forgotten. It was their job as parents to shield their children from unnecessary pain, even if it meant facing difficult moments without their comforting presence. What would he tell them later? How would he explain this day, this moment, in a way that made sense to their young minds? He had always tried to be honest with his children, to give them age-appropriate truths rather than comforting lies. But how did you explain complexity and uncertainty to a child? How did you teach them that life sometimes brought challenges that had no clear solutions, no happy endings guaranteed? William became aware that people were looking at him expectantly. Something had been said, a cue had been given that he had missed while lost in his thoughts. He felt a moment of panic, unsure of what was expected, what he was supposed to do or say. The protocol for this situation had been discussed and planned in detail, but in this moment his mind went blank, and then, as though drawn by an invisible thread, his eyes found Kate. She was already looking at him, her face calm but her eyes full of understanding and encouragement. In that instant, everything else faded away. The hundreds of people in the Abbey, the cameras that he knew were capturing every moment, the weight of history and tradition surrounding them. All of it became background noise, insignificant compared to the connection between him and the woman he loved. Kate's expression said everything words could not. She was telling him it was okay, that whatever he was feeling, whatever he needed to do in this moment, she supported him completely, that they were in this together, just as they had been in everything else since the day they met. Her strength flowed across the space between them, tangible and real, giving him something to hold on to when everything else felt uncertain. He saw her take a deep breath, a deliberate and centering action. Without conscious thought, William found himself mirroring her, breathing in deeply, filling his lungs, then slowly releasing. Again and again. With each breath, he felt himself settling, finding his footing on what had seemed like constantly shifting ground. The bishop was speaking again, and this time William forced himself to focus. Words about courage and faith, about facing adversity with grace, about the strength that comes from love and commitment. The words were meant to comfort, to inspire, but William felt them differently. He felt them as a challenge. Could he live up to those ideals? Could he be the person everyone seemed to believe he was? He looked at Kate again, unable to help himself. She had become his compass, the fixed point by which he oriented himself when everything else was in chaos. And she was still watching him, still sending him that quiet strength that only she could provide. He saw her lips move slightly, forming words he could not hear but somehow understood. You can do this. We can do this together. Something inside William shifted. The fear and uncertainty did not disappear, but they became manageable, containable. He straightened his shoulders, lifted his chin slightly, and felt a sense of purpose settle over him. Whatever happened next, he would face it with dignity. Not because it was expected of him, not because protocol demanded it, but because Kate believed he could. And her faith in him had always been enough to help him believe in himself. The moment stretched between them like a bridge across turbulent water. William and Kate, separated by the width of the Abbey's central aisle, connected by something far stronger than physical proximity. Everyone in the congregation could feel it. The air itself seemed to shimmer with the intensity of what passed between husband and wife in those seconds of locked gazes. Kate had never looked more beautiful to William, and it had nothing to do with her appearance. It was the light in her eyes, the unwavering steadiness she projected, the absolute certainty that she would be there no matter what came next. In a world that felt increasingly unstable and frightening, she was solid ground. She was home. He felt his throat tighten with emotion. All the feelings he had been pushing down, suppressing for the sake of maintaining composure, suddenly threatened to overwhelm him. Love for this woman who had stood beside him through everything, gratitude for her patience during his darkest moments, fear of a future that might force them to navigate unimaginable challenges, hope that somehow, despite everything, they would find their way through. Kate saw it all playing across his face. William had never been good at hiding his emotions from her, even when he successfully masked them from the rest of the world. She knew every expression, every subtle shift in his features that signaled what he was feeling, and right now she knew he was struggling, teetering on the edge of losing the composure he had fought so hard to maintain. She wanted to go to him. Every instinct screamed at her to stand up, to walk across that aisle, to take his hand and remind him physically that he was not alone. But she remained seated, understanding that sometimes the most powerful support comes not from action but from presence, from simply being there, seeing someone fully, and letting them know through nothing more than a look that they are loved beyond measure. The king watched this exchange between his son and daughter-in-law, and something profound moved through his chest. He had witnessed many touching moments in his long life, had been present for births and deaths, weddings and coronations. But this simple look between two people who loved each other struck him with unexpected force. He thought of his own marriage, of the woman who had stood beside him through his own trials and tribulations. He thought of the moments when words had failed but presence had been enough. He thought of the countless times he had drawn strength from simply knowing he was not facing the world alone. And seeing that same connection between William and Kate reminded him of what truly mattered, underneath all the ceremony and tradition that defined their lives. The king had been sitting upright, maintaining the perfect posture that had been drilled into him from childhood, but now watching his son in this moment of raw vulnerability and strength, watching Kate offer silent support with nothing more than her gaze, he felt something shift inside himself, something ancient and deeply human that transcended titles and positions. Slowly, almost without conscious decision, the king began to lower his head. It was not a dramatic gesture, not performed for effect. It was simply an acknowledgement, a recognition of something sacred happening before him. His head bowed in respect for the love he was witnessing, for the courage both William and Kate were displaying, for the very human struggle they were facing with such grace. People throughout the abbey noticed. A ripple of awareness moved through the congregation like wind across water. The king, who bowed to no one, who represented the peak of their social hierarchy, was bowing his head. It was unprecedented, unexpected, and deeply moving. Some people felt tears spring to their eyes at the gesture. Others held their breath, overwhelmed by the emotion of the moment. The bishop, who had been speaking, paused in his words, recognizing that something beyond the planned ceremony was taking place. The choir, prepared to sing, remained silent, instinctively understanding that no music could improve upon what was happening naturally. William saw his father's head lower, and the gesture hit him with the force of a physical blow. His father, the king, showing such open respect and humility, acknowledging not his royal position but his humanity, his son's pain, the sacred nature of the love and support being offered between husband and wife. It was perhaps the most profound gift his father had ever given him. Tears finally escaped William's eyes, sliding down his cheeks unchecked. He made no move to wipe them away. In this moment, surrounded by people who cared, witnessed by his father's gesture of respect, supported by Kate's unwavering gaze, he allowed himself to simply be human. Not a prince, not a future king, not a symbol of anything beyond the simple truth of a man facing difficulty with the woman he loved beside him. Kate saw the tears and felt her own eyes fill in response. But she smiled through them, a small, trembling smile that held all the love in her heart. She nodded at him just slightly, a tiny movement that said she saw him, all of him, and nothing he was feeling diminished him in her eyes. If anything, his willingness to be vulnerable, to show his genuine emotion, only made her love him more. The moment could have lasted seconds or hours. Time seemed irrelevant, suspended in the weight of what was transpiring. Everyone present knew they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Not because of its grandeur or spectacle, but because of its essential truth: love, support, respect, and shared humanity, displayed with such purity that it cut through every barrier and touched every heart. The king slowly raised his head again, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. He looked at his son and saw not the man he had tried to prepare for kingship, but the boy he had held as an infant, the child he had taught to ride a bicycle, the young man who had grieved so deeply for his mother. He saw all of it at once, and his heart swelled with a fierce protective love that surprised him with its intensity. He wanted to speak, to say something that would capture the significance of this moment, but found he had no words adequate to the task. Some experiences transcended language. Some emotions were too vast and complex to be contained in sentences, and so he simply sat with the feeling, letting it wash over him, accepting it as a gift. Kate finally allowed herself to break her gaze from William, needing to collect herself before she completely lost her composure. She looked down at her hands, still clasped in her lap, and saw that her knuckles were white from gripping so tightly. She consciously relaxed her fingers, shaking them slightly to restore circulation. Such a small thing, but it helped ground her, brought her back to the physical reality of where she was. She glanced up again and found William had regained some of his composure as well. He had wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, a simple, unpolished gesture that was somehow more touching than any formal motion could have been. He stood straighter now, his shoulders back, his spine aligned. But something in his face had softened. The rigid mask he had been wearing had cracked, revealing the real person underneath. The congregation began to stir, sensing that the moment was shifting, that the ceremony would soon continue. People reached for tissues, dabbed at their eyes, cleared their throats quietly. The bishop looked to the king, silently asking permission to proceed, and received a small nod in return. But nobody in that abbey would forget what they had just witnessed. They had seen a future king allow himself to be vulnerable. They had seen a princess offer strength through nothing but her presence and her love. They had seen a monarch bow his head in respect for something more important than any crown. They had seen the essential humanity that connected them all, regardless of title or position. As the bishop prepared to continue, William took one more look at Kate. She met his eyes again, and this time both of them smiled. Small, private smiles that held understanding and promise. Whatever came next, they would face it together. They had been tested in ways they never anticipated, but their foundation had held. Their love had proven strong enough to weather the storm. And that knowledge, that certainty, was worth more than any throne or title could ever be. The bishop's voice resumed, filling the cathedral with words of prayer and blessing, but the atmosphere in Westminster Abbey had fundamentally changed. What had been heavy with tension and worry now felt lighter, charged with something almost hopeful. The powerful moment that had just transpired between William, Kate, and the king had created a shift in everyone present, a collective understanding that they had witnessed something rare and precious. Throughout the congregation, people were processing what they had seen in their own ways. Some wiped tears from their cheeks, not ashamed of their emotion, but rather feeling privileged to have been present for such an intimate display of human connection. Others sat in quiet contemplation, reflecting on their own relationships, their own moments of struggle and support. Many found themselves thinking about the people in their lives who had stood beside them during difficult times, feeling renewed gratitude for those bonds. An elderly duchess in the third row clutched her husband's hand more tightly, remembering their own trials from decades past. A young couple near the back exchanged glances, seeing in William and Kate a reflection of the partnership they hoped to build together. A diplomatic official who had attended hundreds of formal events found himself unexpectedly moved, realizing that beneath all the pageantry and protocol, these were simply people dealing with the universal challenges of human existence. Kate remained seated, her hands now relaxed in her lap, her breathing steady and calm. The intensity of the moment had passed, but its effects lingered within her. She felt simultaneously drained and energized, as though she had run a great distance but discovered reserves of strength she had not known she possessed. The connection she had shared with William across that space, silent but profound, had reminded her why they had chosen each other all those years ago. Their love story had begun simply enough. Two young people meeting at university, navigating the awkwardness of early attraction and tentative first dates, but it had grown into something far deeper and more complex. They had weathered public scrutiny, media intrusion, and the constant pressure of living lives that belonged partially to the nation. They had learned to find private moments in public spaces, to create islands of normalcy in a sea of extraordinary circumstances, and through it all, they had chosen each other. Every day, in small ways and large, they had made the decision to stay committed, to work through difficulties rather than run from them, to build something lasting despite the obstacles. The moment that had just occurred in the Abbey was not an anomaly, but rather the visible manifestation of years of such choices, accumulated into a bond strong enough to withstand almost anything. William, still standing at the front of the Abbey, felt as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Not entirely, not completely, because the challenges they faced were still real and present. But the burden felt more manageable now, distributable between two people rather than crushing down on him alone. His father's gesture had given him permission to be human, to show vulnerability without shame. Kate's unwavering support had reminded him that he had the strength to face whatever came next. He thought about the coming weeks and months, about the uncertainties that still loomed large. There would be more doctor appointments, more difficult conversations, more moments when the future felt frighteningly unclear. But he also knew that Kate would be there for all of it, just as he would be there for her. They would take turns being strong when the other faltered. They would hold each other through the dark nights and celebrate whatever small victories came their way. The king sat with his hands folded in his lap, his expression peaceful despite the emotion that had moved through him moments before. He was thinking about legacy, about what truly mattered when all was said and done. He had spent much of his life preparing for the crown, learning the intricacies of governance and diplomacy, studying history and tradition. But watching his son in this moment, he realized that the most important legacy he could leave had nothing to do with policy or procedure. The legacy that mattered was teaching by example how to be human in an inhuman situation, how to love deeply despite the risks, how to show respect for the sacred moments that connected people to each other and to something larger than themselves. His gesture of lowering his head had come from that understanding, from a place beyond his training and position, from the simple human heart that still beat beneath his royal robes. He glanced toward Kate and felt a surge of appreciation for the woman his son had chosen. She had brought warmth and genuine caring into their family. She had maintained her own identity while embracing her royal role. She had shown their family what true partnership looked like, how two people could support each other while still remaining distinct individuals. He was grateful for her presence in William's life, especially now, when that support was so desperately needed. The service continued with readings and hymns, each element carefully chosen to provide comfort and inspire hope. The bishop spoke of resilience and faith, of the human capacity to endure and even find meaning in suffering. His words were eloquent and thoughtful, crafted to address the situation they all faced without being too specific or maudlin. He walked a careful line between acknowledging difficulty and maintaining hope, between respecting pain and encouraging strength. People throughout the abbey listened with varying degrees of attention. Some absorbed every word, finding genuine comfort in the familiar rhythms of prayer and scripture. Others drifted in their own thoughts, using the structure of the service as a container for their private reflections and emotions. A few struggled to maintain their composure, occasionally reaching for tissues or leaning on the shoulders of those beside them. Kate found herself studying the stained glass windows that lined the abbey's walls. Sunlight was beginning to break through the clouds outside, sending colored beams of light across the stone floors and wooden pews. The images in the glass depicted biblical scenes, stories of trial and triumph, suffering and redemption. She had seen these windows countless times before, but today they seemed to speak to her differently, their ancient narratives feeling suddenly relevant and immediate. She thought about the countless people throughout history who had sat in this very space, seeking comfort and guidance during their own difficult times. Kings and queens, certainly, but also ordinary people who had been granted entry for special occasions. All of them had brought their fears and hopes, their griefs and joys into this sacred space. All of them had looked for something beyond themselves, something that might help them make sense of the chaos and uncertainty of human existence. William noticed the light changing in the abbey as well. The shift from gray dimness to colored brightness felt symbolic, as though nature itself was responding to the emotional transformation that had taken place. He took it as a good sign, perhaps foolishly, but he had learned that hope could be found in the smallest of things. A beam of sunlight, a shared glance, a father's gesture of respect. These moments did not solve the larger problems, but they made them feel less overwhelming, more survivable. The choir began to sing again, their voices rising in a harmony that seemed to literally lift the spirits of everyone present. The music was both powerful and gentle, filling every corner of the massive space while also somehow feeling intimate and personal. It was the kind of performance that reminded people why humans had created music in the first place, as a way to express emotions too deep for words, to connect with each other and with the divine, to transform pain into something beautiful. As the final notes faded away, the bishop invited everyone to stand for a closing prayer. The congregation rose as one, the sound of hundreds of people moving in unison creating a soft rustle that echoed through the abbey. William and Kate both stood, he at the front and she in her pew, and for a moment they did not look at each other. They did not need to. The connection established earlier remained, an invisible thread that kept them linked regardless of physical distance or visual contact. The prayer was brief but powerful, asking for strength and healing, for comfort and hope, for the wisdom to face whatever challenges lay ahead with grace and courage. When it ended, the single word Amen was spoken by hundreds of voices simultaneously, creating a sound that was both a statement and a question, both an ending and a beginning. People began to file out of the abbey slowly, reluctantly almost, as though leaving this space meant returning to the harsh realities of the outside world. They spoke in hushed tones to one another, processing what they had experienced, promising to keep William and Kate and the entire family in their prayers. Some paused to sign a book of support that had been placed near the exit, leaving messages of encouragement and love. William remained standing as people passed by, accepting handshakes and kind words with quiet gratitude. Kate joined him after a few moments, slipping her hand into his naturally, effortlessly. Together they stood, thanking people for coming, for caring, for being part of this moment that would forever be etched in their memories and hearts. The last of the congregation had departed, leaving Westminster Abbey in a profound silence that felt almost sacred. William and Kate remained standing together near the altar, neither quite ready to leave the space where so much had transpired. Their hands were still joined, fingers intertwined in the way of people who had held each other through countless moments, both joyful and difficult. The king approached them slowly, his footsteps echoing softly on the ancient stone floor. When he reached them, he paused, seeming to search for words adequate to the moment. Finally, he simply placed a hand on William's shoulder, a gesture both fatherly and respectful. No words were spoken, but none were needed. The touch conveyed everything that language could not. William felt his throat tighten again with emotion, but this time the feeling was different. Less about fear and more about gratitude. Gratitude for this man who had tried his best to be a father while also being a king. Gratitude for Kate, whose strength had carried him through the darkest moments. Gratitude even for the difficulty itself, because it had stripped away pretense and revealed what truly mattered. After a long moment, the king withdrew his hand and nodded to both of them before turning to leave. They watched him walk away, his figure gradually diminishing as he moved toward the distant doors. Even in retreat, he maintained his dignity, but it was a different kind of dignity now, more human, more accessible, more real. Kate leaned her head against William's shoulder, allowing herself this small moment of rest. They stood like that for several minutes, simply breathing, simply being, allowing the quiet of the empty abbey to settle around them like a blanket. Outside, they knew people were still gathered. Cameras were still waiting. The world was still turning with all its demands and expectations. But for these few precious moments, they could just be William and Kate, husband and wife, two people who loved each other facing life together. Eventually, Kate spoke, her voice soft but clear in the silence. "We're going to be all right, you know. Whatever happens, we'll face it together and we'll be all right." It was not a question or even really a statement of fact. It was something more like a promise, a commitment to making it true through sheer force of will and love. William nodded, not trusting his voice quite yet. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, a tender gesture that had become routine over their years together but somehow felt especially significant now. She was right, he knew, not because the challenges they faced would magically disappear, but because they had each other, and that was enough. It had to be enough because it was all they could truly control. They began walking toward the exit, their pace slow and measured. Kate noticed details she had never paid attention to before, during the countless times she had been in this building. The way light fell across particular stones, creating patterns that changed as they moved, the slight echo of their footsteps, each sound bouncing back to them after a moment's delay. The faint smell of incense and old wood and history. William found himself thinking about their children, imagining the reunion that would happen when they returned home. The kids would ask questions, of course. They would want to know what happened, whether everything was okay now, what came next. He and Kate would answer as honestly as they could while still protecting their innocence. They would reassure them that no matter what, their family was strong, their love was certain, their home was secure. Teaching their children how to face difficulty with grace and courage would perhaps be one of the most important lessons they could offer. Not pretending that life was always easy or fair, but showing them that humans had within themselves the capacity to endure, to support each other, to find meaning even in suffering. The moment in the Abbey today, as difficult as it had been, would become part of that teaching. As they reached the large wooden doors, Kate paused and turned back to look at the interior one more time. The stained glass windows glowed with afternoon light now, the colors more vibrant than they had been earlier. The empty pews stretched back in perfect rows, waiting for the next gathering of people seeking comfort or celebrating joy. This building had witnessed so much over the centuries, had held so many human emotions within its walls, and would continue to do so long after they were gone. There was something comforting in that thought. Their struggles, while feeling all-consuming right now, were part of a larger human story that had been unfolding for generations. They were not alone in facing difficulty. They were not unique in their fear or their love or their determination to survive. They were simply the latest in a long line of people who had stood in this place and tried to make sense of life's challenges. William opened the door, and immediately they were met with the sound of the outside world. Cars in the distance, people talking, birds singing, life continuing its relentless forward motion regardless of individual circumstances. They stepped out into the daylight together, and immediately dozens of cameras began clicking. The crowd that had remained pressed forward slightly, eager to catch a glimpse of them, to see how they looked, to read their expressions for clues about what had transpired inside. But William and Kate were ready now. They faced the cameras with calm composure, not the rigid mask of earlier, but a more natural, genuine steadiness. They waved to the crowd, acknowledging the support and concern that had brought so many people out despite the weather. They saw signs held up with messages of love and encouragement, saw people crying, saw children waving small flags. A young girl, no more than 7 or 8, broke free from her mother's grip and ran forward with a bouquet of flowers. Security moved to intercept her, but Kate raised a hand, signaling them to let the child approach. The girl stopped a few feet away, suddenly shy, holding the flowers out with trembling hands. Kate knelt down to the child's level, accepting the bouquet with a warm smile. "Thank you so much. These are beautiful. Did you pick them yourself?" The little girl nodded, unable to speak but beaming with pride and excitement. Kate gave her a gentle hug before the child ran back to her relieved mother. It was a small interaction lasting only seconds, but everyone who witnessed it felt its warmth. These were the moments that reminded them why their positions existed, why they shouldered the burdens of public life, not for the grand ceremonies or the political importance, but for these simple human connections, for the ability to bring a moment of joy to a child's day, for the opportunity to show that despite their titles and their circumstances, they were people just like everyone else, capable of kindness and gratitude and genuine care. William and Kate walked to their waiting car, still hand in hand. Before getting in, William turned back to wave one more time at the crowd. He found himself smiling, a real smile that reached his eyes. He saw his father in another car about to depart, and they made eye contact. The king smiled too, a small, knowing expression that acknowledged everything that had passed between them today. As they settled into the car and the doors closed, shutting out the noise and the cameras, Kate and William finally allowed themselves to fully relax. The driver began the journey home, navigating through the London streets that were both familiar and somehow new. Everything looked slightly different now, colored by the experiences of the day, by the emotions they had felt and expressed, by the connections that had been strengthened. "Thank you," William said suddenly, looking at Kate with eyes full of emotion. "For everything. For being exactly who you are, for standing beside me, for being strong when I couldn't be, for never letting me forget that I'm not alone in this." Kate squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening with tears she no longer tried to hide. "You don't have to thank me. This is what we promised each other. In sickness and in health, remember?" "I meant those words then, and I mean them even more now. We're partners, William, in everything. Always." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city pass by outside their windows. People going about their daily lives, unaware of the small drama that had played out in Westminster Abbey. Shopkeepers opening their stores. Students rushing to classes. Parents pushing strollers. The ordinary, beautiful chaos of human existence continuing uninterrupted. As they approached their home, William felt something settle inside him. Peace, perhaps, or at least acceptance. The challenges they faced had not disappeared. Tomorrow would bring new difficulties, new decisions to make, new moments to navigate. But today had taught him something valuable. It had shown him that love was stronger than fear, that vulnerability was not weakness, that showing respect and humanity mattered more than maintaining perfect composure. The car pulled through the gates, and William could see their children's faces pressed against a window, watching for their return. His heart swelled at the sight. Those three young people were the best of him and Kate, the living embodiment of their love and commitment. Whatever happened next, whatever trials lay ahead, they would face them as a family, united, unbreakable. Kate saw the children too and laughed softly. They've probably been at that window for the past hour. There was warmth in her voice, affection mixed with gentle amusement. Those children were their world, their reason for being strong, their motivation to face each new day with hope. As the car stopped and they prepared to exit, William took one more moment to low.